Deadly unrest in Central Asia. At least 18 die as protests turn violent in Uzbekistan's autonomous Karakalpakstan region. The government declares a state of emergency, but is the situation under control? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Karakalpakstan. Most people around the world will never have heard of Karakalpakstan. The autonomous region is home to about 2 million people and enjoys a special status as a sovereign republic within Uzbekistan. But when the Uzbek president announced plans to reform the constitution and potentially change that status, the autonomous region rose up. In a rare act of defiance, thousands took to the streets in protest, and it ended in brutal chaos. Demonstrators tried to seize several government buildings in the provincial capital, Nukus. According to human rights groups, they were met with excessive force, leaving at least 18 dead and hundreds injured. Amnesty International is calling for an investigation into the violence.
The images we saw last weekend on social media, which showed brutally injured protesters and what looks like blood on the streets, were truly shocking. The authorities must urgently disclose exactly what happened in Nukus, order an impartial, independent, and thorough investigation into the use of force against protesters, and ensure those responsible face justice in fair trials.
Well, the planned constitutional amendments were part of a broader raft of reforms proposed by President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. It included extending the presidential term limit to 7 years and allowing Mirziyoyev to run for a further 2 terms. But the point of contention for the Karakalpaks was their special status. If the reforms had passed, the new constitution would no longer consider the region a sovereign republic, and their right to hold a referendum on secession would have been taken away. But the protests seem to have forced the president into a change of heart. He says Karakalpakstan's status is secure and those amendments will be scrapped. But some from the opposition fear the situation could still get much worse.
The situation can totally spin out of control. It won't be about the status of Karakalpakstan. It will be about a conflict between Karakalpaks and Uzbeks. It is the most dangerous thing.
So a state of emergency has now been imposed on Karakalpakstan, bringing a level of calm to the region. But for how long? Joining me now to debate that are from Tashkent, Gulnoza Ismailova. She's a lawyer and member of Uzbekistan's Central Constitutional Commission. Luka Ancheski is a professor of Eurasian Studies at the University of Glasgow. And in Los Angeles, Steve Swerdlow, an associate professor of human rights at the University of Southern California and a Central Asian Affairs analyst. Thanks all so much for being with us. Let me begin in Tashkent. Gulnoza, why were constitutional changes proposed that would affect the autonomy of Karakalpakstan, and was it understood what the reaction could be?
Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the constitutional reforms in the Republic of Uzbekistan. As we know, the Constitution of the Republic of Uzbekistan was adopted in 1992, so many years ago. So many changes, the republic, the state changed, the people changed, the society changed. So we see that there is life demand to have some changes in the main legal act. So there's a natural process of state building and improvement of the country's legal system in the republic, when each of the parties and almost every citizen of the country has the right to express its opinion, position, to propose paragraphs and amendments to the basic law of the Uzbekistan. So as we see, the Constitutional Commission was formed of 47...
Okay, sorry, just in the interest of, the clock is a bit against us, so we'd like to kind of keep it as concise as possible. So I understand you wanted to make changes to adapt to changing times after so many decades, but still, why change the autonomous status of Karakalpakstan?
So it was the amendment, and it was the proposed of the people, of the deputies of Karakalpakstan, and the Constitutional Commission was seeing the difference of these positions, and after that the draft of this legal act was announced, and we see that this is the change of the society, and this was like an amendment they proposed to be the constitution. And we see that the main idea that now Uzbekistan changed. When it was the 90s, the main idea of the constitution was to strengthen the state. Now the main idea of the constitution is to strengthen the human rights, the dignity of person, the honor and dignity of a man. So that was the main idea why we're changing the constitution. So many amendments, more than 200.
So were you then surprised surprised then by the reaction out of Nukus?
Of course, it's democracy is an ongoing process. And this was the lesson, and for us, as we, of course, we're surprised. Of course, it is not the natural process. It is the provocators from inside which are going to make this destabilize the situation, to do it in illegal actions in the process of the making some amendments to the constitution. To these destructive forces to try to destabilize the region, the Karakalpakstan, the people of Karakalpakstan, to destabilize the unity of the Uzbekistan, of the nations of it's one nation, it's one country. Karakalpaks and Uzbeks, it's one country.
Okay. So in your opinion, do you think the problem is solved now?
Trying to be solved to make the end of this problem. The problem was that it was not the ordinary people. It was not the authorities of the Karakalpakstan. It was some leaders of the riots received this significant logistical and methodological support from abroad. It was something like organized action to destabilize this situation. So, so many in these couple of days was made to stabilize the situation. First of all, it was the president meet ordinary people, met deputies, and met the representative of Jakarta Kengas. He made his speech to them. He announced the emergency situation at the Karakalpakstan region to stabilize the situation. So this will be the month of this emergency situation will stabilize situation, and the main idea that President proposed to not to make changes at the legal status of Karakalpakstan.
Okay. Okay, let me turn to Steve in Los Angeles. I mean, does that sound a fair and logical explanation to you, that they were simply trying to adapt the Constitution to changing times after several decades, and that perhaps they underestimated some of the forces in Karakalpakstan that would react and respond the way they did, even with support from abroad?
Well, Andrea, thanks for having me. There's more questions than answers at this point. And we have to be clear at the start about one thing, which is that Uzbekistan, despite undergoing many reforms over the past 6 years, I've been there dozens of times, and there have been some positive changes, the country remains firmly authoritarian in the sense that the main decisions about Karakalpakstan, its autonomy, the constitutional reform process, are made by one man, the president, Shavkat Mirziyoyev. And it's still very unclear why these amendments were proposed. They seem to be unnecessary, haphazard, and certainly in the context of what's happening in the wider region with Ukraine, really short-sighted. And they touched a nerve that sparked massive protests, which has led now to probably the greatest test of President Mirziyoyev's leadership In the past 6 years, 18 killed, 243 injured, 516 at least people detained. So this is a crisis. And I think the real motivation for the constitutional reform process that we really can, I think, say concretely, was to rewrite the Constitution, remake the Constitution, essentially allowing President Mirziyoyev, who's now serving in his final term, to serve again under a new blank slate, so to speak, although those don't really exist, as we know, in law. But that seemed to be the main motivation for the constitutional process. And these amendments about Karakalpakstan appear to have been entered without great thought about what might happen, and they certainly sparked a crisis.
Okay, Gulnoza, I just need to get your response to that. Is this really just about arguably cementing the president's power to make it even a stronger authoritarian state, as some analysts are saying?
I would suggest all the foreign experts, all the people who trying to provocate these amendments to the Constitution, just to take this draft of law, to be acquainted with the changes, to be acquainted with the amendments, to see what is going to be. It's not a nowadays it's nowadays demands. It's something that is going on for the last 6 years. The changes of the priorities, the priority of the people, the priority of the person, the priority of the human being, his rights and his freedom. So many changes will be to construct the human rights that is based on not on the only national legal acts, but on the international laws.
Okay.
And
very quickly, Steve, do you believe that?
You know, I think what is problematic about this process, and I agree with Gulnoza that any of these initiatives should center human rights, and I agree that there's a motivation on some level to do that. But there was a very short consultation period provided for people to make comments to these amendments. And as we know, this is a fundamental change that existentially changes the status of 40% of the territory of Uzbekistan. So certainly it was done haphazardly. And I think going forward, there has to be a serious rethink and reexamination about whether or not this process should take place so quickly, and take place without allowing real consultation with independent voices.
Okay. Let me get Luca into the conversation. Apologies for taking some time. Luca, what is your analysis here in what the Karakalpaks actually want? Are they genuinely looking for independence? And is there any kind of leadership for a Karakalpakstan secessionist movement? I know there is a group that calls itself the government of Karakalpakstan in exile. I mean, are they taken seriously?
Well, I think that this is not very much about independence or secession. This is about autonomy, an autonomy which has been granted to the Republic of Karakalpakstan since 1991, and even before. This is a Soviet legacy. There was a Soviet SSR in the same region. So this is something which has been recognized ever since Uzbekistan has had its own current borders, which is almost 100 years now. So I wouldn't really look into this from the perspective of destabilization of the Uzbek state from forces within Karakalpakstan or elsewhere. I would just say that it's a miscalculation on the side of the central government that has probably underestimated the reaction that people from that particular region of Uzbekistan, which is a peculiar one, may have by seeing their autonomy withdrawn. And it is a part of a general trend that we see in Central Asia. The only two truly autonomous part of the region, which is Karakalpakstan as well as Gorno-Badakhshan in Tajikistan, have witnessed riots recently, which means that there is a tension between centralization, which is authoritarian centralization, and search for autonomy. So no, yeah.
Well, I mean, it seems all of you agree that it wasn't really an objective here on either side for a secessionist movement to somehow succeed. It seems that there was just a lack of forethought as to what the response to these potential changes would be. But In the meantime, now we're hearing talk about, potential ethnic strife as an issue. Luca, I can stick with you. I mean, do you think that this has perhaps launched something when it comes to ethnic division in Uzbekistan and in the region, or is that an exaggeration? Or are ethnic rivalries or clashes no part of what this is now?
Yeah, this is something which would be very difficult to address for me because I'm not on the field. My sense, though, is that there are a series of socioeconomic grievances which go beyond the request for autonomy, but I haven't really been hearing of like pre-July or early on this year's riots in the region. So I would tend not to believe that, but of course I would defer to people like Gulnoza who are in Uzbekistan now.
Okay, because Steve, I want to come back to you about this because when we talk about certain social ills that are specifically in this region, there has been mention of the environmental degradation that Karakalpakstan is victim of. I mean, it's almost like nowhere else in the world. How much has it played a role in the lives of the Karakalpaks and how they might feel toward their government?
Well, that's true. Obviously, Uzbekistan as a whole faces many socioeconomic challenges, but Karakalpakstan is unique in the sense that it is the site of the disappearance of the Aral Sea. That's an issue that has plagued Karakalpakstan and led to astronomically high rates of drug-resistant tuberculosis and other problems for decades. It's something that the government has tried to address, not just the current president, but the president before him. And yet what it's meant is that it's a very depressed region. There are a lot of issues that the government is challenged to and trying to develop tourism, employment, and that does feed into the ethnic Karakalpak issues. But there are also ethnic Kazakhs living in Karakalpakstan. There are also, of course, Uzbeks and other groups. And I think the government generally has been reluctant to talk about ethnic minorities in an open way. That's a legacy of the previous dictator, Islam Karimov. So I think going forward, in addition to this, an investigation into the events of violence, the killing, the detentions, the journalists, I think there does have to be a broader conversation about what social ills, as you said, economic problems and political ones are driving these protests.
Gulnoza, would you agree there?
There was Uzbekistan first. Uzbekistan is a national country. It has more than 130 different nationalities in Uzbekistan. So one of them is Karakalpak, who lives in Karakalpakstan. We see Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Karakalpaks. And if we see the last year's reforms in Karakalpakstan, so many actions by the president were made. It's about the its capital income in Karakalpakstan increased almost 3 times. About the RLC, we can see what has made in this ecological situation on RLC. We see the programs in Karakalpakstan which made to increase the economical growth, their position, and there was at any time, no time till this day, even now, there is no bad attitude or bad relation between the Karakalpaks and Uzbeks. We should talk about this. There was the action of some provocators, some people who wanted to destabilize the situation, of the amendments.
Okay.
So,
let me just ask Steve about that. Is there an element of provocateurs driving ethnic division in Uzbekistan?
Well, let me say, I think that's a familiar trope that the authoritarian governments of Central Asia like to pull out of their hat after unrest, something that we heard in Kazakhstan in January after violence, about 20,000 foreign terrorists causing that unrest. That's untrue. That's unhelpful. at this moment in particular, it muddies the water. And I just want to say that while I agree generally with Gulnoza that there haven't been widespread ethnic strife or tensions, I myself did witness a heavy-handed approach by the local security services in Karakalpakstan when I was there in Nukus, in the region's capital, in 2019. I saw a very modest protest by people carrying Karakalpak flags on the Republic's Independence Day, December 16th. And they were, in 3 minutes, they were arrested and they were thrown into the back of police cars. This is simply, and this is something that we see in relation to a lot of protests, not only ones that deal with ethnic issues. So it's important to simply recognize that the heavy-handed tactics that authorities use, I think they only further provoke these problems. They don't really solve them.
Okay. Luca, let me, go ahead, Gulnoza. You had a comment.
Steve, I have a question to Steve. Have you been there in 19th yourself? Have you seen this from your with your eyes, or it was some pictures in the internet, in social media, pictures from the some kind of photoshops or like that?
Thanks, Gulnoza. No, thank you. When I was on the square in Nukus and I was taking pictures of what was happening, I just happened to be there as a tourist at the Savitsky Museum, which you know. And in fact, the security services came up to me and tried to make me delete the photographs in my phone. So I've seen it personally. And unfortunately, this has happened, but this was on a much smaller scale, mind you. But this was 3 years ago. And this group of activists called Alga Karakalpakstan, they're mostly outside of Uzbekistan. You're absolutely right. They're not a significant group in terms of, we can't measure their support among the population. But I think it's an exaggeration to say that there are no feelings of national sentiment or that there's been no movement at all. That's not true.
Luca, if I can come back to you, I wanted to talk about you yourself, when I asked you the question, you said, it's hard for me to say, I haven't been out in the field. But there is less information in general out there about Central Asia. It's an underreported region in large part because it's very difficult to access. So, I mean, how good is the reporting and information that we are getting outside the country about what's happening inside its borders?
Well, it's good to the extent to which the government allows that to be good, in the sense that the reaction that we've seen happening in this particular case is that as soon as there are disturbances, there are riots, there are protests, internet gets shut down, the access to the region gets completely blocked, and journalists are discouraged to report. That was the first reaction of the government in Tashkent, and of course, in the last couple of days, it enlarged a bit. But this idea now that you have a month of emergency state imposed on Karakalpakstan, where people can't go in and out, is a reaction that is to block information, access to the information. And if I made just one point about the provocateurs that we discussed before, arguing that there is this kind of situation going on, all the more requires for an independent investigation what's going on. Okay. I would say that this is...
Gulnoza, let me ask you about that. We just have a minute left. What would you like to see actually going forward? Should there be an independent investigation? Should there be accountability for those that have died in these protests in Karakalpakstan, or will the government not allow that?
We should say that Uzbekistan is now the open society, and we see it was not many years ago, we couldn't say that it was allowed to mass media to talk about it. It was not allowed to see the process from inside. We see that the representative of state organs, of the prosecutor's office, they talk about this openly. They say about the death, and they began the investigation. So we can see, for example, the talk of our president with Charles Michel. He talked about the openness, about the role of Uzbekistan in Central Asia, about this situation in Karakalpakstan. We're talking about openly. So the investigation is open. It will be independent. It will be, of course, it will clarify the situation, what was going on, what was in the reality, to show the world that the civilized process, the open discussion, about the fake news, about the fake information which is coming from abroad, and about the situation from inside.
Okay, Gulnoza Ismailova, I'm going to have to give you the final word. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers, but I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much. Lukan Chesky, Steve Swerdlow, for being with us as well. And our viewers, of course, for tuning in. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.